right, everybody. Wherever you are in the world, for some of us, it's super early in the morning, 5 o'clock. Other people, it's a reasonable time, and obviously South Africa, it's a nice time. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So, welcome to another one of our AfATAP webinars. Again, I was recently at the American US ATAP conference in Los Angeles. Was it last week already? Yeah. And it's always nice that a lot of people who come up and say how much they enjoy the webinars, and they really appreciate the great content, firstly, and the regular content. So we're really proud of this sort of little thing that AfTap has got up and running. And of course, we're going to continue that next year. We're really busy looking at speakers for next year's lineup because we want to, again, like this year, try and line it up early in the year so everybody knows what's happening. Also saves us the anxiety of, oh my goodness, it's 3 weeks to go. Who we're gonna get as the next person to speak? So that and of course, going to the conferences gives an opportunity to meet amazing people and hear a really amazing topics. So definitely check out next year's lineup when we start to put that up. So Kelly, I've known for a number of years through the ATAP conferences that I was fortunate enough to try and go to every year in LA. She's going to tell us about the book she has written in a moment. So she's an author, a lot of years of experience in the world of threat assessment, has done some very interesting training, active shooter, FEMA training, etc. She's the head of the Diamond Arrow Group. And again, has a lot of specialization in the area of situational awareness, which is, of course, our topic for today. But I'm sure you all read her bio, which was very brief. There's a lot more to her. So you can go check out her LinkedIn bio also. But and also, Kelly, please feel free to add anything that you think is relevant for people to understand why today you are talking about the topic you are talking about. So, Kelly, again, thank you so much for sharing your time. Thank goodness it's not too early in the morning for you. We've always been, like we were chatting before, and the ATAP community is one, or the threat assessment community is one where people are so very kind and generous with their time that I don't think I've ever had someone say that they can't help us out with the webinar and share their expertise. So you're definitely join a crowd of great people that have been kind enough to be participants or speakers for our webinar. So I'm going to hand it over to you, but thank you so much, and you're very welcome to be here.
All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you, Gerard, for that intro. And as we were talking earlier before the webinar got started, we were sharing a little bit, and he mentioned my book, Sharp Women. And so I'll just give a really high level how I got started in this, because oftentimes they're like, oh, are you law enforcement? Are you military? What's your psychology? What's your background? My background is actually hospitality and tourism. So I joke that I'm L from like Legally Blonde, Elle Woods, not LE, not law enforcement. But where this came from, where my passion for situational awareness for the everyday person, I took a female self-defense class almost 10 years ago now. And we spent the entire 4 hours hitting, kicking, doing all the physical skills, yelling, no, get back, all of that, which is great. But at the very end of class, one of the instructors said, but ladies, let's be real. Like, predators don't pick prey they think is going to physically, beat them up. You need to be situationally aware. And I was like, hold on. So we don't want to get into a physical fight. So all the skills we worked on the entire class, I'm supposed to avoid using. But the thing I'm supposed to use all the time, we didn't talk about at all. What is situational awareness? And so that started the question that I couldn't find an answer for from a civilian, especially female perspective. And so, yes, I reached out. I was married to law enforcement. So I asked him, connected with the bigger names in women's self-defense in general, and just the training and tactics, left of bang, Cooper's Colors Code, the OODA Loop, Combat Hunter Program in the Marines. What can we all do? And I was like, okay, I get the concepts, but I'm not going into battle. I'm not running towards danger. In fact, I want to avoid it. I want to de-escalate it. I want to get the heck out of Dodge. And I probably have two small children who can't run very fast and aren't going to be able to stay calm and quiet in a situation. So there's just a different dynamic of things I need to think about. And the more I asked, okay, where can I go get this training? They were like, well, there isn't anything. And again, there was limits to the law enforcement or military training I could attend because I wasn't law enforcement or military. And so I took it upon myself to learn as much as I could, understand the foundational skills of situational awareness, and then relate it to my everyday life. And then I started sharing that, just in casual conversations with friends. And they encouraged me to put it out there on social media, share it. And so it's really organically grown over time. And once I started my business, went all in, COVID, the pandemic hit. And then that's when I said, well, I can't get out and train. I'll write my book. And so my book, I basically said, is the updated female version of Gift of Fear, because that was the only book that I could find talking about situational awareness that was a civilian perspective, but it was written in 1997 and still by a guy. So I just said, where's the newer version, or where's the female version? So I wrote my book during the pandemic. It was published in 2022, and that was actually my first ATAP winter conference that I attended. And I not only fell in love with the field of threat assessment because it fit exactly what I was trying to do, but also the people. And ever since then, it's really, my business has grown to do a lot of corporate workplace violence prevention training, going into schools or colleges or government agencies, because as threat assessment professionals, we rely on those firsthand experiences. We rely on the bystander basically to say, so and so there's a change in their behavior, but they've never been taught exactly what to look for, how to look for it, how to articulate it, what threat assessment is in a way they can relate to. And that's the niche I fill. So without further ado, I don't want to use up too much of my time, but definitely at the end, I'll have contact information. I welcome all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm really passionate about getting up in front of the everyday person, the frontline employees, teachers, parents, students, young individuals, and giving them this foundational knowledge. So with that, if you have any questions, like Gerard said, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can wait till the end, one or the other. So I call this sharpening your situational awareness skills, because I believe we all have them. It's all abilities that we're born with, but we don't know necessarily how to sharpen them, because we're born with intuition. And I don't believe that anyone is broken, even if they've had a traumatic event or an experience, or the social mores have said, you need to be this way, you need to be kind, don't be judgmental. You're not broken, you just need sharpening. You just need to get back to your sharpness of when you were a little kid and had no filter and just said whatever came to mind, or trusted your intuition better. One of the things that really hit me was, I think it was 2 years ago now, Elliot Rogers, Chin Rogers, came and spoke at the Threat Management Conference in California. And in a room of 1,000 people, you could hear a pin drop. And one thing that really struck me is that a behavior change that she took as a good sign that her son's mental health was improving was actually pulled out or picked out as a clue that he had committed to following through with his horrific act. And when she said, I always ask audiences, what do you think that change in behavior was? And again, keep in mind, you all are threat assessment professionals, but this presentation, not only will you hopefully learn something new, but this is a way to think about it that you can possibly take back to your loved ones. So when I ask general audiences, what do you think that change in behavior was? They're, he bought a gun, or he did this, or he did that. And I'm like, no, he had a second helping at dinner. And of course, most of the people in the room gasp, because what? That was the sign? And I say, Andre Simmons, who, was also part of the FBI's behavioral threat assessment unit, he said, a behavior change isn't as important as the fact that there was a change. And so we, as a society in general, need to stop or be very aware if we're being really prescriptive. Watch for X and then do Y. Or this is what a dangerous situation looks like. These are behavioral changes, because it's not what the change is, it's the fact that there was a change. And teaching the foundational skills of observation, intuition, articulation, and the impacts of adrenaline, because it's different on males and females, it's so important to talk about that, because what we might think is common sense isn't necessarily common sense if somebody doesn't have an interest in this. And We as humans learn better through play. We learn better when we're having fun, when we're enjoying the material. So we can't come at it with like a fear or if you don't do this, something bad will happen. I believe in leaning on curiosity, making it enjoyable, and saying, how can we make this really tough subject to talk about to most people enjoyable? And that's what I do. So without further ado, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this show, but just watch this quick clip.
What number are we on?
Oh my God, is this not your mother's recipe?
Yes, and now I'm passing it on to you. So try to keep up. Oh, next step is to fold in the cheese.
What does that mean? What does fold in the cheese mean?
He folds it in.
I understand that, but how do you fold it? Do you fold it in half like a piece of paper and drop it in the pot, or what do you do?
David, I cannot show you everything.
Okay, well, can you show me one thing?
Here's what you do. You just fold it in.
Okay, I don't know how to fold broken cheese like that.
And I don't know how to be any clearer. You take that thing that's in your hand.
Uh-huh.
And you...
If you say fold in one more time.
It says fold it in!
This is your recipe. You fold in the cheese then.
Don't you dare.
You fold it in.
David! Oh, good. Now I see bubbles. David! What does burning smell like?
I start all of my situational awareness 101 classes with this video because it immediately relaxes the room and sets the tone. Most people start laughing and they're like, oh, wait, okay. So they kind of, if they've walked in with any fear or anxiety about learning about this, they've started it out laughing. And the reason why this is important is I say to them, how many of you have been told to be aware of your surroundings? How many of you have been told you need to be situationally aware? And you're like, great, what am I looking for? How do I know I'm looking for the right things? And if I see something, then what? And then what? And the person just says, you just need to be aware. And it can become this really frustrating dynamic or conversation because the person wants to know all of the details. But when we get so good at something, like if we've gotten so good at being situationally aware, it's subconscious. We do it without thinking. So trying to pull out what exactly the foundational skills are can be challenging. And so that's where I come in. In threat assessment, we spend hours honing our skills to recognize when an individual is on the pathway, but it's reactive. And again, we rely on individuals to give us the clues like, hey, this is really strange because my son is very, very regimented about his diet, about his exercise, and all of a sudden he's eating donuts or whatever it may be. And that's something to pay attention to. And it's not necessarily, oh yes, for sure they're going to commit violence, but it's, hey, we need to check in. Hey, we need to look more closely at this. This is my working definition of situational awareness. Having awareness means using your senses and intuition to notice when something is off in your environment, and then understanding what that means to you and your safety. And then lastly, taking action to preserve your safety. Because situational awareness is a critical skill that enables people to recognize, assess, and respond effectively. My presentation is aimed at how do we teach people how to sharpen that skill, give them confidence, like, oh yeah, I could do this. It empowers them, whether they're a parent, a teacher, a coworker, or just a community member. And it's so important for them to make accurate and timely reports of those concerning behaviors, because I always like to say, creepy is not illegal and weird is subjective. So you can't come to somebody and saying, this so-and-so is being creepy to me, or so-and-so is being weird. Well, what do you mean by that? So some of the training topics I'm going to cover here are like how to develop those observational skills, talking about the biological process of intuition, recognizing the changes in behavioral patterns and making confident decisions through practical and relatable exercises. Again, if we really slow down and think about it, we can replicate certain situations, but do it in a way that's actually fun. Now, to learn more than facts, students often need help recognizing how facts connect. So again, and not all brains work this way, but you can give me a whole bunch of information and say, here's all the bullet points that you need to do. But unless I understand the whole process, I'm not going to be able to take that and use that it through my own lens, because I'll be trying so hard to remember the bullet points. I'll be trying so hard to remember the step-by-step instructions, versus if I come to understand the process, then I can apply it to more situations, and I might not get stuck going, well, wait, we did 1, 2, but we skipped 3. How we can't be at 4 yet. So it helps with that. How an intuition works, that it's not just woo-woo. And kids, I always like to remind people, are naturals about this, because they're like, but why? But why? And Nobel laureate Herbert Simon wisely stated, the meaning of knowing has shifted from being able to remember and repeat information on being able to find and use it. And we can't ask a fish to climb a tree or a zebra. So why I teach the way I teach is not everyone wants to learn necessarily about violence prevention, because just even saying violence prevention, they get a little, is this going to be gory? Is this going to be like scary? And it's not necessarily that they don't want to learn. They just don't want to learn it necessarily in the way that it's being done. We learn best through play, through having fun, enjoying the learning experience, being able to relate to whatever the presenter's giving us, the information. I did a booth at an HR conference last fall and was just talking about, hey, my workplace violence prevention training pairs great with active threat training, because I'm actually talking about all of the things you can look for before the gunman or the shooter or the threat is at the door. And so I had a lot of the female HR people coming up to me, and I was giving away a free training. When I went and did that training for the winners organization, I had one of the women say to me, they're like, there was an active threat breakout session that she attended. And she said, I just have to tell you, when I was in the breakout section, she goes, I was starting to get anxious. She's like, I was starting to sweat. It was starting to get in my head. Like, I was getting all nervous. I was getting adrenalized. And she stopped hearing the presentation because she immediately went into, oh my gosh, what if that happened to me? Like, I would just freak out. So instead of listening and learning, she was getting scared. But she said, your delivery style actually made me feel like, oh, wait, I could do that. And it made her feel empowered and felt excited and more confident in herself. And that's really what we want, because I'm sure many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is just one diagram that I've seen. And there's actually some really cool ones at this past TMC conference that I might switch out. But we all need or have our basic needs: food, water, shelter, warmth, rest. But right above that is safety and security. And it's not just physical security, it's also psychological safety. And a lot of times people talk about paranoia. They're paranoid, they have fear. And it's about helping them change that paranoia to curiosity, and giving them the tools to say, hey, if you're psychologically feeling uncomfortable, that's when you start paying attention before it escalates to a physical sense of well, something's off. Because if we all want to have, the greatest of relationships, the best creativity, an employee situation, a corporate situation, in order to have really effective and energized employees, they need to feel safe. And so if we're not meeting that basic need and giving them the tools and skills and knowledge, we're actually doing our business, our companies, our communities a disservice. And what I've found is a lot of, so quote unquote relationship experts on social media, if there's a question about domestic violence, or if there's a question about, do you feel safe? They're like, here's some hotlines to call. But they don't really talk about that because it's, I don't know. I talk about relationships. I don't talk about, potential violence or abuse. Self-defense experts then come up, and they're all about that physical self-defense moves or tactics, but they're not gonna get into the relationship problem or the relationship dynamics or situations that may come up. They're like, yeah, no, you need to go, we're not psychologists or we're not therapists, you need to go to a relationship expert. So there becomes this big gap. And as most of us know, 75 to 85% of attacks on women come from someone they know. So there's a lot of psychology there. There's a lot of dynamics to consider. And most of the time, a lot of like the worst of the worst tragedies or mass violence events have stems in or stem from some sort of child abuse or domestic violence. So this is real. If we really want to get to the root of some of the problems, we need to start having these conversations and giving people the skills and tools and knowledge. And I always say, but we don't teach calculus to kindergartners. We have to start with the foundations, basic math. And so developing observation skills. I talk about all of their senses and in a way they can relate to. I mean, sight. I always say when I'm in groups, I'll be like, close your eyes. What's the person next to you wearing? And by this time, they've been sitting next to this person for 15 minutes. And you can hear the crowd kind of giggle because they're like, I don't know what they're wearing. Or maybe they guess and it was the wrong color sweater. And I remind them, for me, I have two boys, 12 and 13. And there are days when I take them to school and I go, I don't even know what they were wearing because I don't care. Their fashion choices aren't the hill I'm going to die on in the morning when I'm trying to get them out the door and just get them breakfast and get them going. So there's things that I try and say, like, this is why eyewitness testimony is typically unreliable, is because in the moment of something happening, our brains, which are actually what's seeing things, don't think that image is important. We don't really care what that person was wearing because they were wearing clothes. So it wasn't off. It's just I wasn't paying attention to that detail. And our sense of hearing, I say, how many of you in a corporate work environment know your boss's footsteps, the sound of his footsteps or her footsteps? And when you hear it coming down the hall, you can close browser, right? And so I remind them if it's a parent group, when your kids are sneaking snacks because of the sound of the cupboard door hinges, or if you're a teenager or something like that, if you're coming in after curfew, or if you're coming back when you're not supposed to be, where not to step on the floorboards so they don't make any noise when you get home. Our sense of hearing works faster than all of our senses because we'll hear things and then we look to see, we hear a car door slam and then we'll look to see, oh, who's here, and different clues. But again, we've never necessarily broken that down. And I talk about we can hear at night, we can hear around corners, sometimes we can hear through walls. What does our sense of hearing tell us? What does the sound of someone's voice, just the tone, tell us about their mood, or if something changes, their mood shifts? Our sense of smell. A lot of times our sense of smell gives us clues without us really realizing it. Sometimes it's overt, like if you smell gas, natural gas in a building, we can't see it, we can't hear it, but we know I smell gas, I got to get out. Or I talk about if you've ever smelled skunk and you're driving down the road, all of a sudden you smell it and you start looking for it. You didn't see it, you didn't hear it, but you can smell it and sense it. Our sense of smell, those inputs are most closely tied to memory. So that's why a certain smell might remind us of someone or a place, and we get nostalgic a little bit. I had a gentleman one time come up to me and he said, I met my wife when we both worked at this fast food restaurant. He's like, there's a picture of us. He goes, I see that picture and I can still smell the fryers. I can still smell that deep fryer oil smell. And so it's really interesting how that all impacts us. So I talk about if you're ever walking down the street at night and all of a sudden you smell cigarette smoke, you might not see a person there, you might not hear them, but if you smell that, someone's there. So you can start to be, okay, I need to be aware, where is that person? They may not be a threat, but it's getting curious and paying attention to what your sensory inputs are telling you. Our sense of touch. We're never not touching something. But because the way our intuition works, unless something's different, it's really not going to say, hey, we need to pay attention to that. But I remind people, we don't necessarily think about how our shoes feel on our feet until we get new shoes. We don't think about how it feels to sit in our chair until we get a new chair. So a lot of those things, and until something's different, that's when our conscious We consciously become aware of it. And we can also sense energy. And that's a real thing. You can sense a heaviness in a room. You can sense a celebratory mood in a room. And while that may also involve reading some nonverbal body language, it's a real thing. And what I like to remind people is also, if you were ever attacked, you can, and it's at night and it's dark and it's from behind, is did you feel facial hair? Did you feel any hair on their head? What was the material of their clothes? Because those are all still clues that may help us as predecessors get a better picture of, you know, the predator, the perpetrator. And like I say, but it's not all scary things. You know when the sun comes out from behind the clouds because all of a sudden your skin's warm because the sun's on your skin. So becoming really in tune with all of our senses is important. And lastly, taste. And I'd like to bring this back because in case people are starting to think or kind of go down the negative or scary or paranoid thing, is like this is taste is a great example of how our intuition is always working in our best favor and is always in a reaction to something. And I say, how many of you have drank spoiled milk by accident? And side note, there's a lot of people who have done that. I say, you don't swish it around in your mouth like a fine wine. That taste, and instantly your intuition goes, wait a minute, this is off. And I don't want you to get food poisoning. And so you're spitting it out as quickly as you can. You're not necessarily consciously thinking about it. And so this is all how our senses communicate about our environment from the perspective of intuition, that it's not a prankster. It's always in response to something, and it has our best interest in mind. So we need to learn how to trust it. And because sometimes those signals are going to come in situations where, wait, it doesn't seem like there's a violent threat. And this video doesn't have any sound, but it's a great example of how if we're only focused on like the worst of the violent threat actors, we may miss the manipulators and some of the more early warning signs. And I'm hoping most of you caught that, but he swapped out the deposit envelope. And when I show this video again, most of the time the audience kind of gasps. And I'm like, here's the thing to remember is it's not, he seemed like he was trying to help. And so I don't want you to start thinking that every person who's offering you assistance is got ill intentions. But the thing to keep in mind is she really wasn't looking around, looking like she needed help. And he interrupted her, and then he was very persistent. He kept saying, he was like telling her to look at the screen, and he took the envelope out of her hand. So it's getting curious and saying, well, why is this person trying to assist me? And it's okay to take a pause. We don't need to go along with it, because that's really what, the manipulators or somebody who's trying to con you is trying to do, is to kind of distract you and make you make decisions fast without really realizing what's going on. And I also remind them of this. How many of you have done this? Or have you ever been driving down the road and then wondered if the light was green or not? There's no such thing as perfect situational awareness. We have to sleep. We're humans. We've got a million things on our minds a lot of times. We're not a John Wick movie. We're not a Jason Bourne character. We can't always be hypervigilant. That's not a way to live. So it's reminding them and relieving them of that pressure to be on all the time. That intuition, the more they learn to trust it, the more their intuition, they'll notice those signals faster and be more calm and present. Intuition is not paranoia. And I remind them, we've all been born with intuition. We all have intuition, even animals. But the difference between human and animal intuition is judgment. And with judgment comes the ability to deny what's happening around us. Did I really hear gunshots, or was that firecrackers? Am I overreacting? Am I reading too much into this? And we start to deny. And the problem is, a lot of times women pick up those. We're better at reading tiny nonverbals and accurately assessing them to the emotions that they're tied with, but because maybe we only saw that, or maybe the perpetrator was only targeting us. When we share that and like, you know, my coworker is just, I don't know, something about him makes me uncomfortable. He's almost too friendly. And they're, oh, you're just overreacting. That's the way he is. And so then that seed of doubt gets planted, and they're like, yeah, maybe I am overreacting. Maybe there really is nothing bothering my son or my daughter. And so we'll deny it. And that's what tends to then override those early warning signals as we think, oh, it's just me being over emotional again. It's just me overthinking things again. And I like to point out, women are statistically the biggest consumers of true crime, whether it's podcasts or shows or documentaries. Why? They're looking for knowledge. Like, women are tired of dying and missing the early warning clues. So when we watch true crime, it's like a study session. What did they miss? Because I don't want that to happen to me. And they tend to deny their reality, that they're probably going to know their attacker, because then when it happens so fast in those situations, you kind of psychologically go, but this person cares about me, or I thought this person was my friend, or this is my coworker. Is this really happening? And they might go into a freeze state, or they might fawn and try and de-escalate the situation, or try not to further enrage their attacker if that's the situation. And I just always like to remind them, your intuition is not a prankster. If you sense something is off with a person, you may not ever truly be able to know why your intuition is telling you that, but trust it. Trust your gut, because it's your secret weapon. And I believe the sharpness of our intuition is dulled over time. And again, it's not broken, just needs sharpening. So we need to make sense of things so that they can relate to, so that they stick. I giggle and say this, if there's any car fanatics in the room, and, some people raise their hands, some people are like, I know absolutely nothing about my car. And I say, okay, well, think about intuition as like the indicator lights on your dashboard. If you know your vehicle and you feel confident that you understand how your vehicle works, or so when an indication light that something might be wrong, you go, oh, okay, well, that's just the, battery, whatever. I need to get a new battery, or, whatever the case may be, I need to go get this checked out. Or if you don't know anything about your car, and if you feel like you're quote unquote dumb when it comes to vehicles, and you see an indicator like, come on, you might be like, oh, I don't know, that could be really, really bad. I'm just going to put some tape over it. Then I can't see it, right? Stick my head in the sand. I'm just going to hope nothing bad happens, or somebody else will come along and fix my car. And that's how I feel like people who don't get this knowledge or get this information feel about self-defense, about awareness, is they're like, oh, I just hope it doesn't happen to me. I don't know. This is too scary. And a lot of them, when we start trying to talk to them, we'll say, okay, well, it's the OODA loop. Listen, we all go through this process. You can observe this, the orient, the decision, the action. And what I put this diagram on the screen on purpose to say, this is how you need to make decisions. And their eyes kind of cross and glaze over like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, hey, guess what? You do this every day. Do you drive a car? You get in your car and you observe the road conditions. You observe how much fuel is left in your tank. You observe road signs and the cars around you. And for the orient phase, what's been your experiences with driving? Who taught you? How were you influenced? Where did you grow up? Where did you get driving license? That's going to impact how you view driving. Your orient filter is really shaped by the influential people in your life, by your cultures and traditions, by your environment that you were raised in. So that's why it's different for everyone. Your perspective is different. And I say, in the orient filter, let's say you've rear-ended someone, or you've been in a car accident. Well, now you've had that imprint. And now when you're driving, anything that gets close to resembling what happened to you in the past, you're going to have a quicker reaction, because there's already that filter, or that impact on your orient filter. So like for me, if I've rear-ended someone before, I'm probably going to leave more space between me and the car ahead of me. So if that gap starts getting smaller, I have a decision to make. Can I, based on my observations, based on my experience, hit the brakes, or do I need to change lanes? And so you have that decision to make based on your orient, based on your perspective, and based on your observations. And the thing is you have to make a decision, because if you don't, you're going to rear end that person. So you have to take action. You have to either hit your brakes or change lanes. And then the process starts all over again. So I say the OODA loop might look confusing if you're looking at this diagram, but guess what? It's a basic decision-making matrix. And in the business world, in your personal life, we all go through this process, but it's just not been described in that way. And this is where I also stress when we talk about the orient filter that perspectives are going to differ. You know, like, don't doubt their intuition based on someone else's perspective of the situation. Because what's scary to me might not be scary to someone else. And I like to bring up this quote. It's from the Humans of New York book. And it says, we're eye doctors. What's something about the eye that most people don't realize? That the eye doesn't see, the brain sees. The eye just transmits. So what we see isn't only determined by what comes through the eyes. What we see is affected by our memories, our feelings, and by what we've seen before. Grasping this concept can help them recognize any of the biases they might have. And we all have biases based on our unique orient filter, our perspective of the world. We all have a different perspective of what would constitute something off, right? Like Chin Rogers' mom, observing that he had a second helping at dinner was off. I have 2 teenage sons. Them having second and third helpings at dinners is not off behaviors. So it's not right or wrong necessarily. It's simply our perspective. It's simply our baselines. What are our baselines? And we have to get them to trust their intuition. And how do we build trust in something? Through honesty and consistency. So I remind them, there's things that you can do, small daily habits that you can do that'll help sharpen those skills. You can wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to notice every red car. And so then it's a habit of like, I'm looking for that, or I'm going to look for everyone wearing a hat. I'm going to notice everyone doing this. Describing people, being able to accurately describe people that's objective is actually really hard for a lot of people. We all think we can do it, but then I say, okay, if you're driving down the road and you come to a stop sign, look over in the car next to you, and then turn back and be like, if I had to describe that person, how would I describe them? Or, maybe it's a pedestrian that you see. How would I describe that person? And practice it. Okay, how would I describe my best friend? We go to a festival together, we get separated, and I'm trying to find her, and I go to the information booth, and it's like, hi, I'm looking for my friend. Okay, what does she look like? How would I describe my best friend? And, and then little clues like that too is mastering memorization. How many details can you recall? There's the Kim's game. Keep in mind, and it's a box with like 10 different items. You can look at it for 60 seconds, and then, you have to go down and you have to write everything you observed. How many things can you recall? And I tell them, like, an exercise for that is at the end of the day, think about maybe a meeting you were in, or if you went to the coffee shop. How many details can you recall from that? Who was there? What were they wearing? What were their names? What was said? What was the mood of the place? I get a lot of times questions from parents. How can I talk to my kids about situational awareness in a way that doesn't scare them? And a great example from a friend of mine who has the Secure Dad podcast. He taught his kids to count the doors. So every time they went into a facility or into a building, he would say, okay, how many doors are there? Because what it naturally got them doing is scanning for exits or potential exits, but in a way that wasn't scary. It was just simply counting the doors. And practice using multiple senses at once, because we know that they all connect. So if you hear something and you look for visual confirmation, reminding people, don't be looking down at your phone and have your earbuds in. Like that's not a way to go and walk around in transition areas when you're going from point A to point B. Work on using all of your senses. Be very present. And how many of you have looked at your to-do list in the morning and mentally gone through everything you need to do and what order you need to do it in order to accomplish it for the day? building the mindset, building mental skills. This isn't about, excuse me, scaring people again into, if you don't do X, then Y will happen to you. It's about thinking, well, what would I do if I thought I was being followed? If I thought someone was breaking into my house? If I thought my coworker was on the pathway to violence? What would I do? And it's mentally thinking through this. And so I suggest to say, if you read a headline of an attack, ask yourself, what would I do if I was in that situation? And I remind them, it's not about victim blaming. This is about asking yourself, if I found myself in that situation, what would I do? Because there's a lot of data and science behind visualization. And there's some wise words from Zig Ziglar, which I'll read. As we delve into our self-image, let's remember that the mind completes whatever picture we put in it. For example, a plank 12-inch wide laying on the floor would be easy to walk. Place that same plank between two 10-story buildings, and walking the plank is a different matter. You see yourself easily and safely walking the plank on the floor. You see yourself falling from the plank stretched between the buildings. And since the mind completes the picture you paint in it, your fears are quite real. So if the training goes straight to the violence and you could die, that's what they see happening. I've literally had women tell me before this class, I thought if I got attacked, I was dead. Like they were already giving up in their mind. And I was like, no, 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 let's not, we got to paint a different picture. So it's not what somebody did wrong. It should be like, hey, let's use training examples that show this was a scary situation, but it ended up okay. Nothing happened. Here's what they did right. Because we need people to start visualizing what they can do right to avoid a situation. We need to change the script. And in order to those intuition signals to get through, we need them to remain calm. We need to remain calm. I like to remind them that thoughts of worry and paranoia are manufactured. We worry about things. But a true fear signal, a true intuition signal is organic because it's reaction to something and it has our best interest in mind. So I use the analogy that if you're in a room full of people, think of that as like the worry thoughts in your head, or the worry voices in your head. And if everyone's talking, you got a lot of thoughts of worry in there. And the true fear signal is across the room saying, hey, something's off, I need you to pay attention. It's going to be really hard to get that intuition signal over all of the other voices in the head. Whereas if we can learn to stay calm and to be present and mindful and trust our intuition, those voices will quiet. And then when a true fear signal needs to get through, we'll be able to hear it more clearly. And remember that paranoia, switch it to curiosity. And a lot of times advice that I've heard from doctors or therapists who are trying to help people who have anxiety attacks or panic attacks, they say one of the things to calm down is to, okay, take a deep breath. Name 5 things you can see, or 5 things you can hear or smell, whatever. It's getting in touch with your senses. I'm like, that's situational awareness. So the more that you learn to be situationally aware and sharpen your skills, it actually is a calming impact on you because you feel very aware of your surroundings naturally. So learning to be more situationally aware isn't about keeping your head on a swivel, watching your 6, being paranoid. It's actually about being calm and present. Because again, too much worrying causes stress, and stress can narrow our attention, cause tunnel vision. And using all of our senses, don't just trust and rely on our eyes to tell us if something is off in our environment. And tell people, like, take time to every once in a while go, what are all the things I can hear in this environment, wherever I'm at? Do I hear birds? Do I hear cars? Do I hear an espresso machine? Do I hear cars honking? Do I hear voices? What is the mood of those voices? Using your sense of hearing. And again, we don't always have to look for danger. It's looking around and noticing, oh, look, the flowers are blooming. Oh, look, the smell, I can smell somebody just cut the grass. Whatever it may be, it's learning to be aware and be present. And this is a question I ask people, like, okay, how many of you here have responsibilities? And everybody kind of giggles, and especially in a corporate setting, I say, hurry, everybody should be raising a hand because your bosses are in the back of the room. We all have a responsibility. Well, our personal safety is our responsibility. We can't rely on other people. We can't rely on someone, a quote expert, to be standing beside us saying, yes, that is a warning sign, or no, that's not. Yes, we need to pay attention to that. So you need to take responsibility for your personal safety, whether that's taking a self-defense class, whether that's learning which kind of tool you want to carry and practicing with that. And making sure that you feel comfortable carrying it. My favorite tool is a flashlight. It's a tactical flashlight because I can go on airplanes, I can go into sporting events, I can go into concerts with me. I always have my flashlight with me. And it's a $20 flashlight that's 350 lumens. It's very bright and it has a beveled edge. We never need to apologize for prioritizing our personal safety. And while that seems simple in theory, when we start talking about boundaries and those psychological tests of our boundaries, that can be really hard, especially for women, because we've been raised or conditioned to be kind, not to be judgmental, don't be rude. And so getting them to understand that their safety is their priority, they don't need to apologize for making that a priority, is that if somebody is trying to push past their boundaries, and it could be something like, hey, a bunch of us are going out for drinks after work. Why don't you come with? No, I've had a long day, I'm tired. Oh, come on, just come out for one. No, really, I just want to go home, and just chill. I'm peopled out. And so I remind people, like, that's not respecting someone's boundary. It's something like that. So working on your boundaries could be, I just need to start saying no more often to things, not necessarily in a negative space or in a threatening space. Because we all know that creating plans, protocols, especially when it comes to an emergent situation, is important to do before something happens. So, now what? I've talked about all their senses. I've talked about how the biological process of intuition works. I've talked about making safety their responsibility. So it's like, great. Okay, now what? What exactly should I be paying attention to? And so I started talking about that baseline. Okay. And if you don't explain this concept, they won't be able to articulate an anomaly as easily. So I say, when you're in an environment like a coffee shop, it's going to be a very different environment than when you're in a rock concert. Two very different baselines. So what would cause something to stand out is going to look different depending on the environment you're in. So I'll say, what is the baseline of a coffee shop? Quiet, people working at top tables, small groups, the sound of the espresso machine, the smell of coffee. And I go, okay, so what would cause someone to stand out? Well, if they're making a lot of noise, if they're being very rambunctious, if they're jumping around, if they're just being loud and obnoxious, basically. I'm like, okay, so now describe the baseline of a rock concert. And pretty much the anomaly in the coffee shop would be perfect at a rock concert. But what would be perfect if a coffee shop would stand out at a rock concert, somebody being quiet, standing off to the side, not talking to anyone, not getting involved, that would be someone to pay attention to. And I go, again, maybe they're just, if at the rock concert, maybe they're just not someone who's interested in going into the mosh pit. So it's not necessarily a threat, but it's something to pay attention to and just to take a few minutes to observe. And like I talked about in the original, is it's not so much a specific behavior, it's there's a change in a behavior pattern. And so we need to sharpen this skill at a conscious level. There was the Netflix series Adolescence that came out, and it was I think there was 4 parts series. And I watched it out of curiosity. And actually, I, had a bone to pick with them because they really only talked about the change in behavior of the son, the main actor, at 5 minutes near the end. And it was just such a brief session. And I'm like, that should have been an entire episode talking about that, because I know there's a lot of parents who watched that docuseries, or that it wasn't a docuseries, that movie series, because they're terrified that that might happen to them, that their child may be someone who causes damage or hurts somebody. And so what are they supposed to be looking for? And in that series, they didn't really talk about it at all. And I tell them for practice, if you like watching documentaries about the true crimes, is notice, well, what was the change? Not necessarily what the behavior was. What was the change in behavior? And again, it's going to be easier in people we know versus a complete stranger. And since women primarily are attacked by someone they know, they're probably given the confidence that you're going to notice a change in behavior probably more quickly because you know them. You know what their normal behavior is, so you'll know when something shifts versus a complete stranger. Again, the body language clusters because, well, what exactly am I supposed to be looking at for nonverbals? And as I mentioned before, creepy isn't illegal, weird is really a subjective idea. So I say it's people watching 101, go ahead and just watch people, observe them, try and guess the dynamic, try and guess, are they on a date? Are they brother, sister? Or is this mom and daughter? Is this father, son? And I talk about it, the dominant submissive behaviors. Helps us in recognizing potential human trafficking situations. And I remind them, you as frontline employees, it's not that you need to get involved, especially in something that could potentially be human trafficking, but is being able to articulate that behavior, a dominant submissive relationship where, maybe the younger person typically isn't making eye contact, isn't talking. You can try and say hi to them, they won't talk to you, but whoever that dominant person is will be answering the questions for them, will be doing all the talking. You'll see a change in that other person's behavior because they might be like shying away from them. Being able to articulate that, the comfortable, uncomfortable cluster, because most of us are just going about our days. We're pretty comfortable. So when somebody's fidgeting or uncomfortable or looking around, that's something to pay attention to. Why are they so uncomfortable? And the vice versa of that, being so comfortable when everyone else is not. And I give the Boston Marathon bombing example. The two brothers were picked out in the CCTV footage because when the bombs went off, they were the only two that didn't turn and look in direction of the explosions. Why? Because they knew they were going to go off. It wasn't a surprise to them. So they were very comfortable in a normally otherwise uncomfortable situation. And interested, uninterested behavior. Again, most of us are just going about our day and actually not even, paying too much attention to what other people are doing around us. So we're very uninterested. But so somebody paying extra interest to you, like if you feel like you're being followed, that's something to pay attention to. Or if you feel like someone's watching you and every time you look, they're trying really hard not to make eye contact. Like I always say with my kids, it's like if they're doing something wrong, they're trying really hard not to make eye contact with mom because they feel like if they don't see me, I don't see them. And so we can observe those body language clusters, but we don't necessarily know how to communicate them. So if somebody's just like, well, they were just being really odd, that doesn't help us as threat assessors. Well, what do you mean by odd? Anyone who is trying to act in a way that's not truly how they're feeling, it's going to be obvious because they subconsciously know they're doing, one thing and trying to portray another. So they're going to be a little over the top. They're going to be a little bit more pronounced in their actions because they're trying really hard to convince everybody, no, I am not following you. I'm actually just doing this. Just in the sense, it's just a coincidence. And really what it comes down to is talking about boundaries, because there's a key aspect about boundaries is that you're going to have different boundaries with different people depending on your relationship and depending how long you've known them. And just because someone's, say, a family member doesn't necessarily mean they get to be get in the family category of boundaries. Maybe you've had a falling out with them. Maybe you don't care for them. So they may be more out in like the acquaintance or even stranger level boundaries. And it depends on my mood. How many of you have ever been peopled out? I was peopled out last night. I had a really long day yesterday, networking event last night. And I all of a sudden was like, I'm done. I'm done peopling. And so I went home because I was like, I'm just not going to overextend. That's a boundary for me. And kind of like mental preparedness. Setting boundaries before you're in a situation, whether that's physical, emotional, or mental, is going to make it easier to enforce those boundaries. Addressing those boundaries sooner is so important, because most, tests of our safety, tests of our psychological safety, which is our boundaries, starts out small. Can I say an inappropriate joke? Can I do something slightly inappropriate? Is that person going to speak up? Are they going to say anything? And if they say something, what are they saying, right? Are they immediately saying, no, I'm not okay with that? That's where those tests come in. And I remind them, your boundaries are yours and yours alone to decide. Obviously there's professional boundaries and social expectations that need to be incorporated. But again, it goes back to your orient filter, stress perspective on them, saying, your perspective of Bob, I'll just use Bob as a name. Sorry if there's any Bobs in the room. I may get along great with Bob. I may have great rapport with Bob. We can like tell off-color jokes. We can give each other grief. But, Susie comes along. Susie doesn't have that same relationship with Bob. And so Bob kind of makes Susie uncomfortable. And if Susie comes to me and says, Bob kind of makes me uncomfortable, I should not be saying, oh, he's great. You just need to get to know him, blah, blah, blah. Say, oh, well, what makes you uncomfortable about it? Have you shared that? Right? How many people in HR sometimes wish, would you just go talk to that person? If you're having an issue with them, go let them know before it grows into a huge problem. But we also can't discount. Just because we get along with Bob doesn't mean everyone's going to get along with Bob. And, maybe there was a situation where I was once close friends with someone, but something happened and they broke my trust. Well, that takes a while to rebuild. So even though I was once really great friends with, a female friend of mine, something broke down and we're not such close friends again. It doesn't, it's the same thing, male, female, whatever the dynamic is, my trust was broken. So now it takes a little time to rebuild that. So for now, my boundaries might be a little bit different, and that's okay. And I don't know if any of you here mountain climb, but I like to ask people, how many mountain climb? Because there's usually not a lot in the room. And I say, okay, just if you don't, let me ask you this. Would you just decide tomorrow to go to climb Mount Everest and go? Maybe there's some adrenaline junkies in the room, but most of us know we have to plan. We have to prepare. It's not smart to just decide one day to go do something and try it without the planning and the practice, and does everyone who makes an attempt to climb Mount Everest succeed in their first climb? No. So it's like similar to boundary enforcement and personal safety in general. For some, even the thought of managing their boundaries seems daunting, or enforcing their boundaries. Like, well, I'm just going to stay at base camp, I'll watch our stuff. No, it takes practice. And even when you're like, okay, I'm all ready, I'm going to do it. And then they try and they think they set a good boundary and somebody walks right around it, or right over it, or right under it. It's completely normal. It takes practice. It takes work. And just because, like I said, maybe you were okay with someone's behaviors in the past, it's if you change your mind, the more knowledge you gain, you're like, actually, I'm not okay with that. It's okay to change your boundary. That's normal. And it takes practice. It's not a light switch. It's not going to turn on overnight. And it's just reminding people that situational awareness is a natural life skill. You just need to trust yourself. Maybe you've been, second guessed in your life. Maybe you've been told you were two of something. Validate that they already have the tools. They just need sharpening. Any of you read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear? In that book, his concept is really, the biggest impact, the best improvement in our life comes from small, daily, consistent habits. Not trying to eat the elephant all at once. Take a daily bite, but consistency. Show up every day and decide, I'm going to prioritize my personal safety. So today I'm working on this skill. Or today, I'm going to start locking my car doors as soon as I sit in my car. That's a habit I got into. As soon as I get in my car, I lock my doors. And I turned the auto unlock off. So when I put my vehicle in park, it doesn't automatically unlock all the doors. They stay locked. And sure, when I have Passengers, they get a little annoyed because they're like, let me out. I'm like, I'm keeping you safe until it's time to unlock. You know, you get used to it and make it fun. If it's enjoyable, more engagement, and they're gonna the habits are gonna stick. The games, they're gonna be like, oh, that's actually kind of fun. I'm gonna do that. And like New Year's Eve resolutions, if you make them so big and huge and almost unattainable, you give up right away. So let's make it enjoyable for people. Let's remind people like this can be fun to learn how to keep yourself safe. Remove the fear of the unknown, because knowledge really is power. And we all know communication is key in relationships, in personal relationships, at work. And we all have different communication styles. So I remind them, enforcing a boundary or telling someone you're uncomfortable doesn't always need to sound like a drill sergeant. Because if I would take what I learned in that self-defense class, like, no, get back, if someone's standing too close to me, if I do that to my coworker because they're standing a little close to me at the water cooler or at the copy machine, if I just shove them across the room, yelling at them to get back, I maybe end up in HR. It's not, you got to find what works for you. I use sarcasm and humor a lot because a lot of times I don't think people have ill intentions if they're standing too close. They're just distracted. They're on their phone. They're not paying attention. So I may make a funny joke like, you know, hey, I know my perfume smells good, but I don't want to burn your nose hairs off. You might want to back up a bit. Because if there's no ill intention, they're going to laugh and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was standing so close. But if there was ill intention and their comment back to me makes me feel uncomfortable, I'd be like, okay, yep, no, you need to back up. You're standing too close to me. I'm going to take it to that next level and be able to vocalize, hey, nope, this is not okay. And I remind people too, if I was in that situation, this is what I would say. But then maybe a situation shows up and all of a sudden we're like, nothing comes out. We like, or trip over our words. And I'm like, hey, does anybody sing in the shower, sing in the car when nobody else is there? Okay, practice your boundary enforcement there. You know, what would you say if someone was standing too close to you? What would you say if somebody made a comment or told an off-color joke that made you feel uncomfortable? Practice saying it out loud. It's so important to say it out loud because you'll hear your voice saying it. You'll hear yourself. You know, are you changing the tone of your voice or the pitch of your voice so it's more like a question? You know, lifting up at the end of your sentence. That's not going to feel direct, or that might not, that feels more like an option. You know, if you don't mind, would you not tell a joke like that again? Okay, well, that's giving them the power back. If you don't mind. No, it's like, I don't know, that makes me uncomfortable, or I don't think this is an appropriate comment in this environment, you know, to work. Or like I've said in the past, even is, you know, one way to do it is like, wait, I don't understand the joke. Can you explain it? Again, depending on your communication style, what would you feel comfortable saying and sticking to it? And remind them they're responsible for their personal safety, but they're not responsible for the other person's response to their boundary enforcement. And recognize that that individual and their boundary enforcement may have an inherent fear or a violence from that rejection. They might worry like, well, if I say this in my past, it has made people escalate. And so the situation has gotten worse. So it's been better for me just to ignore it, to fawn, to placate. And it's like, okay, well then we gotta look at that. That's going into some of those trauma responses and having empathy for that. How are we doing on time? Okay. I want to quickly, I'll go through these slides pretty quickly. I end up talking a lot, but one thing that, again, when it comes up to articulation skills, I don't know if any of you have read the book Visual Intelligence by Amy Herman. I highly recommend it. It's a great book. It's a fun read. It's really fascinating. So I've incorporated these two exercises into my presentation. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, partner up with someone in the room. And if I'm virtual, like right now, I would say, okay, you know, get a piece of paper out or type it in the chat. Describe the images on the next screen. You know, just there's no words. This isn't like, you know, you can't say this word or that word. It's almost, It's you're trying to describe the next image to the person. Like if we're in the room and I have them pair up, I say one's the artist, one's the articulator. Artists, I need you to turn your back so you can't see the image on the screen. Articulators, you need to describe it and you have 1 minute. And so they're like, oh, okay. And they're like, oh, I'm a bad drawer. Doesn't matter. This is all about just practicing articulation skills. And I say, okay, you have 1 minute, describe this item. And people start laughing and they're like, it's the thing the water comes out of. And I'm like, it's a round fruit that is, the name is the same as a color. I'm like, you can literally say it's a faucet, it's an orange. Because what gets interesting is then somebody will say, well, it's a faucet. What kind of faucet? Well, it's one, with like a twisty knob. Okay, but what's the knob look like? And all of a sudden they're trying really hard and they're realizing, oh my God, yeah, how do I describe this? Because the artist is going, what do you mean? I don't understand, explain that better. And so, and then they're laughing and whatever. And I go, okay, your minute's up, turn around. And usually there's lots of laughter in the room. And I say, okay, switch. The articulator becomes the artist and the artist becomes the articulator. Okay, so here's the next slide. Say, go ahead, describe this picture. And now they've kind of gotten a sense of what the game is. So they're a little bit better. Okay, there's a pair of pants on the chair and a shirt and a camera, and they got the minute. The minute's up and I'm like, okay, so you said pants, or did you say jeans? Did you say blue jeans? Did you say, there's a shirt on the back of the chair? Did you mention the color of the shirt? If you said there was a dog on the shirt, well, what kind of dog? Camera. Okay, nowadays, you mean like a cell phone? How do you describe, based on generational understandings, how do you describe a camera? But it does this in a way, and I can guarantee if you've put this, I usually put this towards the end of my presentations, is it really ups the energy again. And people are laughing, but they go, oh my gosh, yeah. How would I describe a camera? Because I've never thought of that before. Again, it's teaching them these skills in a way that they actually enjoy learning, that they have fun with, that's not scary, but helps them go, oh yeah, I've never thought of that before. How would I describe my best friend? How would I describe my kids if I needed to? And the takeaways of that is they talk about how did adrenaline impact your articulation skills and your drawing skills. Men and women adrenalize differently. It's biological, it's scientific. So did you get frustrated that you couldn't communicate the images? Did you get frustrated as an artist because you just wanted to draw and you couldn't understand a word that was coming out of their mouth? How did you decide to prioritize your observations? Did you feel competitive or pressured by the teams next to you? It's like some of the artists will joke, did you give up on your person trying to describe it and you started listening to the person next to you because you thought they're describing it better? We can mimic high stress situations by finding ways to get their adrenaline pumping and then solve a problem. So that time limit, giving them a time limit, immediately people get a shot of adrenaline because like, okay, we got a minute, we got to go. And that's what we want them to do, because in a high stakes situation, it's okay, we got to go. We've only got this little bit of time. And then later, if we want them to describe it, they have to be able to articulate accurately. Well, it was a guy. Okay. What, how big, how tall, how short, how, body type, what ethnicity, what were they wearing, hairstyle, did they have tattoos? We get into those details. And, when we talk about you need to call into, emergency services, not everyone trusts law enforcement. So there could be some barriers there. But many of those domestic violence, those stalking resources, they need a law enforcement report first, a police report first. Or maybe they have to go to HR, maybe they have to go to their managers, maybe there's an anonymous tip line. It's the see something, do something, not just see something, say something. You have to do that. You have to make that report. Help walk them through the entire journey. Help them to understand, because we need them confident so we as threat assessors can do our jobs. We need them confident. This is what I observed. This is what I saw. And tell them, like, you don't, like I always remind people, I ask people, how many of you have ever had to call into emergency services? Some of them have. And I'm like, do you remember that? Like, were you adrenalized because there was probably an emergency happening? And then maybe you were talking too much and the dispatcher was like, okay, hold on. What's your address? What's the nature of your emergency? Because I go, so what you need to do is take a deep breath, let the dispatcher answer or ask the questions because they know what information they need first in order to dispatch services as quickly as possible. So as much as we want to tell a story maybe or make I think this is what was happening. I think this is what's going on. It's like that doesn't matter. Right now we need the facts. And that can be really hard for people because they're adrenalized. How can we get them to like take a deep breath? What's important? What information do we need to give? And fear is not the only motivator. If you're coming at violence prevention from I need to scare people into thinking that they better do this or they're going to die, that's not going to help. Training should not be a haunted house. Fear energy feels very similar in our bodies typically to excited energy. Like people would say, do you get nervous to get on stage, Kelly, and speak? And I'm like, I used to, but I reframe it now when I start to feel anxious or anxiety about speaking, is that I'll say, I'm so excited to speak tomorrow. I'm so excited to get on the stage and speak to all these people, hundreds of people in person, because it's the same energetic feel in my body, but it's a different mindset. So instead of being like, oh my God, I hope I don't screw up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to get up on stage. And working through like stress, one of the things about stress is they say a good way to combat that is to move your body physically, to go for a walk. So think about it as like, okay, people, if you're starting to feel stressed or anxious, move your body, take action, do something, go for a walk, whatever. But take that action. If you're worried about something, report it anonymously. Take action. That's going to help you. And reframing some of these things is going to help them build their confidence that no matter who they are, what their physicality is, where they live, how old they are, what their background is, it's going to help them say, wait, I can do this. I do have this ability. Maybe I'm not the best articulator right now, but I will be, and I can be. And I love this quote: fear does not stop death, it stops life, right? If we start to get more fear in our world, we're going to stop living because we're scared of everything. But that doesn't stop death. It stops life. It stops living. And they may have the missing clue on something. They might think, well, this is insignificant, but I just noticed this, so thought I'd call in and make a report, or I thought I would let somebody know, or HR, hey, I've noticed this change in behavior in my coworker. It might seem insignificant, but in the grand scheme of things, especially as threat assessors, we know sometimes that's the key. That's the needle in the haystack. So I just remind them is like this, making it fun and sharpening your situational awareness skills. You may help save someone's life. And I saw this quote. This is actually a horse trainer in Montana. Move toward freedom, not away from pressure. And his quote is, anyone who claims to be desensitizing horses, well, you should run the other direction. Those horses will be awful, and those trainers don't know what they're doing. The goal with training horses is that we want them to move toward freedom, not away from pressure. And in my opinion, what he was saying in essence is that making the horses feel safe instead of scaring them ensures they can handle most anything out on the trail. So like people, exposure builds confidence and allows for resilience during challenging circumstances. We want them to move toward freedom, towards confidence, not away from danger, away from fear. It's changing the mindset. This was just a quote that I really appreciated from US Bank here in the United States. I had done a presentation, and these were both males, so I pulled this out because this information is not just for females. But Chris, said it was an incredible event. It was great seeing everyone there. Truly inspiring day. Kelly gave us a lot to reflect on, and it's us to continue to sharpen those skills. And a big thing that Chris had said at the presentation too was, hey, let's not keep this information to ourselves. Let's go home. Let's share it with our loved ones. Let's share it with our kids. Let's share it with our coworkers. Like those who couldn't be here with us today. We can all start doing these things, and we can all start improving our communities, our businesses, our families, and help improve our safety. So as I wrap up here, because I do want to leave a few minutes for questions, but some of those takeaways, just to go back, is build the foundational skills. We don't teach calculus to kindergartners. Give them foundational skills. Start working with the basics. help them build their confidence in themselves. Know the audience, depending on who you're trying to help. What stories can I tell them that they would relate to? Are they a parent? Are they a teenager? Are they a college student? Are they, an employee? I mean, I've done presentations for executive protection professionals. They're situational, they're really situationally aware. And they still got something, they still took away. And it was like, hey, nobody's perfect. There are probably areas in your life where you're like, I never thought of it from that perspective. That's interesting. So talking to people, getting it out there, but validating their experiences. Because something to them that was really scary, you might go, that's nothing. I use the example of the spiders. If I see a spider, I'm just getting a Kleenex and putting it in the trash. And now I'm, like the joke is, but in Australia, oh my gosh, I would like scream and run out of the room because they're probably the size of my head. Other people see that small spider and they're running out the room and burning the house down. So things that we think are scary might not be scary to everyone else. So it's important to validate people's experiences, and instead of saying this is what you should do, is be like, oh, well, tell me why you felt that way. Well, what could you do next time? What would make you feel better next time? Because you can't change the past. All you can do is change your behaviors going forward, and you only control you, not the other person. And lastly, I mean, making the experience fun and enjoyable. That's what's going to help information stick. That's what's going to get them like happy. That's what's going to get them to be consistently working on these skills, as if they're like excited to do it. It's like, oh, this was actually kind of fun. And so here's all of my contact information. I try and share, like I said, how I organically started was just sharing what I was learning on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. And so I do that. Like, I have now built up followers who they'll send me videos and be like, hey, talk about this, break this down. And I don't come at it from a fear-mongering perspective. I say, hey, here's the things they did right. Here's ways to think about it. If you would find yourself in a similar situation, start thinking about what you could do. And so I always welcome, pass this on to your loved ones. I have moms come up to me a lot saying, I send all your posts to my daughter because she just went off to college. And yeah, and for guys too. So, it's the Diamond Arrow group on Facebook, the Diamond Arrow group on Instagram. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Like I said, Kelly Sayre, or the Diamond Arrow group. We do have a page, and there's my email. You can email me at any time. I'm always happy to take questions. I'm always happy to help. Maybe, hey, what would you suggest for someone in this situation? Or what are your thoughts on this? What might be the safety plan we can create for this person that I'm helping? And then the QR code is just something I'm starting because of a need I saw out in the environment, out in the world. It's called the Sharp Women Collective. And there's that gray area that women deal with, is like a lot of times certain assistants can't get triggered or can't get activated until after they've been victimized. And so then a lot of times when women especially feel like, what should I do here? Or, this hasn't crossed any legal or criminal boundaries, but I don't feel safe. My quality of life is, what can I do? And there wasn't a lot of resources out there. So because I would see that when I came up to corporate trainings, is I would have women come up to me afterwards and say, this is what's going on. Can you help me? What should I do? So they just really almost need that help with the safety planning before something happens, and validation that they're not crazy, they're not overreacting, they're not being over emotional. And hey, here's some ways to think about it, and here's some ways to keep yourself safe. So I've just created this collective so that there's a place for resources, advice that's knowledge-based, science-based, respects, understands the law and legal aspects, the psychology aspects. It's just really kind of this gathering ground. So it's a resource to help before victimization. And then we mentioned before my book, Sharp Women. It's available on Amazon and in an audiobook format. So feel free to check that out if you're interested. I like to give out the books when I'm around people, because I'm just like, here, read this. And if you know of anyone else that could use this as a resource, feel free to pass it along. Basically, each chapter talks about a specific scenario that women especially face, that there's like, oh, this is gray area. I don't know really what to do or how to deal with this situation. And so I give real stories from people that have been shared their stories with me and talk about, okay, here's some ways to think about this. And here's a reminder, like, you don't owe people anything. If they're being nice to you, that's great. It doesn't mean you owe them a conversation if you don't want to. So it's really talking through some of those everyday scenarios. And with that, I will wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time this morning. This has been great. And I will open this up for any questions. I don't know, Gerard, if you want to open
Yes,
those.
thanks.
Okay.
Thanks so much. And I think this becomes relevant because often as threat assessors, we focus on so much on assessing the level of concern that someone we've been asked to check out is in. And we focus so much on the management of how we're going to make the bad stuff not happen, etc.
Right.
But we kind of forget that the victim sits there in the middle of all of this, or the potential victim. And we could have done the best threat assessment, we can have the best plan in place. But if they're still feeling unsafe, we've achieved nothing. And vice versa, we might say there's no risk. But if they still
Right.
feel as if they don't, maybe because they don't know us, they don't trust us, or we haven't communicated that properly how we got to that conclusion, they still feel exactly the same as before. So we haven't achieved anything. And what's interesting is that there's now seems to be this more focus on, hey, actually, we almost forgot about the victim. We've got to make them feel stronger, safer, if anything, just safe enough to hopefully comply with the management strategy. So we see that in domestic violence cases where people are so paralyzed with fear that they don't want to take whatever steps we suggest, or they just feel so paralyzed that they can't even look after themselves by getting, say, going to see a therapist or getting the necessarily help. And it's interesting to see that, more and more, specifically in things like your structured professional guideline tools, there'll be a
Yeah.
portion about managing the victim and what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what do we need to help them be able to go forward and of course hopefully comply with whatever strategy that we've worked out for them. So it's nice to see that the victim side is being incorporated more and more in how in the actual threat management and threat assessment scenario. So I think that's always important. I mean, and we've got I think one of our talks in October, and I did post it in the chat, is by Totti Karpala, and he's going to be speaking about managing victim fear. So definitely something that we need to not forget. And I used to see this in the police. You get called in to do an investigation, a crime has been committed, and we think of it as our case. Well, it's not our case; it's the victim's case. And we're so focused on tracing the bad guy, catching the bad guy, getting them convicted, that we don't even sometimes keep the victim updated and keep them involved,
Yeah.
and it's their case. And I guess it's just where the focus is, and that we forget about not the little things, because this is really what it's about in the end, is that victim. So I did post a link to your book, so anybody can also click
Oh, thank you.
and some of the other books you mentioned. I just quickly posted links in case people were curious about those.
I'm like a book person. Like I like physical books. So
Yeah.
if I could, I would show you my bookshelf. So if anybody likes book recommendations, let me know because I love that. And I have like 7 books on my coffee table right now that are almost like started or I can't wait to get into. To your point, Gerard, I just want to say this is, um, I understand that law enforcement, threat assessors, psychologists, like that's what you're supposed to be focused on, right? Like that's your job, that's your expertise. And I'm not trying to replace any of that. I'm just coming in and saying, hey, I'm a great resource.
Mm.
Refer me. I always say, like, I'm not trying to replace active threat training. I'm not trying to replace physical self-defense. I think both those things are needed and awesome. I'm just trying to say there's this gap and I see it. I was like at that networking event last night. It was a women's networking event. They're all like, oh, I'm a, not whatever. I have a bakery, I have a deli, I have a restaurant, I'm opening a hotel, I'm a leadership development coach. And I'm like, I do workplace violence prevention. And they're all like, what? And I had a lot of them come up to me and say, actually, I want to know more. What do you do? How do you do that? I think because there is a curiosity and women typically feel very like I know I use the example of stalking. A lot of times with stalking based on laws, until certain action is taken by that perpetrator, there's really nothing law enforcement can do. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because there's nothing criminal. But the victim is like my quality of life, like it's sad. Oh, so basically I have to get beat up, scared to death or die before something will happen to the stalker. And this can go on for years. And so it's how do we support them and give them the tools? Because we can't be their bodyguard.
Yeah.
Like you can't caretake for people. They have to empower themselves. So how do we give them the tools to do so and be their support to say, hey, no, you got this. And that's why I built the collective, is because I'm like, I don't think it's anybody else's responsibility. I don't think somebody's dropping the ball. There's just not a resource out there.
Mm. And I think in case specifically, I know in South Africa, where often resources are a problem.
Yeah.
Police is not going to be responding quickly even anyway. And like you say, I always say to people, police aren't there to protect you. And they're like, what do you mean by that? I said, well, they're there through policing, but they're not there to put, stand outside your house 24 hours a day or accompany you to work and make sure you get there safely. So I definitely think in resource lacking environments like you would often find in Africa, and I'm sure other parts of the world, it is sometimes just down to the victim keeping themselves safe, hopefully without
Right.
guidance, while we try to do what we can from a threat assessment, threat management point of view. So absolutely. So
I've got a comment, Gerard.
yes, Malcolm, go ahead.
Hi, Malcolm.
Hey, Kelly, long time no see.
Yeah.
You already know how awesome I think you are, but I really wanted to say this. We've talked briefly about workplace violence and how we think we can collaborate. I also think that college students, specifically female college students, could benefit from this type of training, specifically when you talk about the alertness aspect of it and watching out for certain things. It definitely would make my job a lot easier. But I do think that that's something to explore. If it's not an area that you focus on now, I would love to talk to you about it for my campus. But I definitely think that college students could benefit just as much as workplace violence professionals.
Yeah. And no, and I will tell you, like my local university actually brings me in. They have a women's self-defense course class, and they give me one class night to teach situational awareness for like the last 4 years. It's awesome. But what's hard now, Malcolm, you and Gerard have known me, right? But you've never actually gotten to see me present. So when you're like, I don't really know how Kelly teaches, what she teaches. So this is why it's so important for me to get up and have opportunities like this. This is why I appreciate that, is because people then go, oh, I get what she does. And then they advocate and they're like, no, we need to bring Kelly to campus. Because otherwise, like the US Bank thing that Chris guy, when I first met him, he was like, hi. And afterwards he came up, he was like, when they told me you were coming and doing women's personal safety, I thought they were going to be doing like BJJ or Muay Thai or Krav Maga. And he goes, oh my gosh, this is like, because how do I describe something that's not been created before? So until I have opportunities to get out and get in front of people, show how I present, give the information, and then especially experts like all of you, then you're like, oh my gosh, I know exactly where to plug this in, and you can advocate for me. Because most colleges, they're like, are you women's studies? Are you this? Are you health and like? There's literally no category for me. They don't know where to put me, which is a blessing and a curse. So I really appreciate opportunities to just come in and speak to groups and share how I teach, why I teach, and the opportunity to get in front of anyone, because my marketing team always wants to kill me. They're like, you need to target. We can't market to everyone, Kelly. You need to get specific. And I'm like, but everybody could have this. So I need to like duplicate myself or figure something out. So again, that's why we're doing the online community, because yeah, I have to sleep at some point, I guess, maybe.
And absolutely, I mean, it fits into the left of bang thing, because obviously the ideal is, like you say, prevent something before it actually happens. And if you're doing the situational awareness stuff, you can do a lot to prevent it. But of course, even after something's happened, it's about keeping you safe from that point onwards if you weren't particularly necessarily situational aware. So I think it's the left and right of the bang. Sorry, Malcolm, did you want to say something else? I think I might have interrupted you.
No, you didn't. You didn't. Thank you, Kelly. Amazing as usual.
Yeah.
Thanks, Malcolm.
And just to point out, today we had 4 of our upcoming new board members. David, obviously, who's the incoming president in November. Malcolm, who's going to be also on our board from November. And Elmarie was on here also. And Elzane. So, yeah, three quarters of our future board. Thanks for attending. I don't think there's any other questions. I don't know if anybody else wants to say something. But again, all the comments were really great and informative. David, did you want to jump in?
Sure.
I did. I just wanted to thank Kelly for her time. What I found is this talk is the missing link because I've been an instructor for 20 years in martial arts as well as executive protection, like you spoke about, Kelly. So one of the things we always get thrown in with is, okay, come and do self-defense for women, and it's like, okay, guys, but we're missing the point. You should be looking for the signs of not getting into trouble in the first place,
Right.
because a woman in a self-defense situation is at a major disadvantage from the get-go. So you develop those skills to not be in that situation in the first place. And it starts small. It really does. It's be alert. Get your head out of your cell phone. You use the color codes of awareness. Oh, Cooper. I mean that's from the 1970s for goodness sake. Just get your head out of your own business and look around a bit. But 100% big advocate and fight the good fight, girl. You're on the right track.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And it's often a difficult sell because people, like you saw it in the early days of the mass shootings after Columbine, everybody was so fixated, and correctly so, on trying to, how do we react when something like that happens? Do we have to change our procedures? Do we wait outside for backup? Do we go inside immediately, even if you're the first responder by yourself? And that's important stuff. But then sort of people said, well, shouldn't we also be looking at trying to stop that stuff from happening? Because once it's happened, once you're fighting with someone, once there's a shoot, it's like, okay, you're in a bad situation. You're just trying to make it not worse. And it's the Virginia Tech scenario where they had phenomenal responses. They saw what happened in Columbine. They spent years preparing for how would we react. But their system to pick up the problems, and that guy Cho had so many places where he popped up on different radars, but there wasn't a comprehensive system to actually say, whoa, hang on, we need to manage this more effectively, integratedly, to stop it from going down that pathway. And of course, Gene Dysinger came in and revamped that afterwards. And this definitely, I mean, and I think it's often difficult to get people to focus on the pre-stuff.
And it's not sexy. If nothing happens, you can't prove that something would have happened.
Absolutely.
And so I sometimes I feel like the little kid who's like jumping up and down, like, wait, I have a suggestion. But everyone's so like, oh my gosh, we've got to, every time something happens and people are like, we got to stop this. And so as threat assessors or physical security assets get thrown at stuff, and it's like, guys, we know what the answer is, but it's hard. It's not easy. And we can't really prove the ROI. So it's it's a huge mountain that we have to overcome. But I just feel I'm the squeaky wheel. If I keep showing up, to ATAP and telling people, you need to just hire me, just bring me in, trust me, but eventually I'll get the tipping point. So.
Great stuff. But thank you very much. Again, as I always say, we select speakers well. So I always sound like a broken record, but thank you for helping us keep up the standards of a really great webinar series and interesting topics, and trying to get, as I said, not new voices, but voices that don't often get the necessary attention to get some attention. So we're happy to have helped you in some way for doing that.
Well, I appreciate it. And again, feel free, like, honestly, please connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on the socials, send me an email. I'm more than happy to offer any assistance, or if I don't have the answers, try and point you to a resource that I do have, especially stateside here. So.
Great stuff. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. For those of you whose days is ending, take it easy. For us, where it's just starting. Now 6:37 my side in the morning. It's going to hopefully be a great day. Thanks. So thanks very much, Kelly, and thank you everybody for joining today.
Yes. Bye-bye.